So picking up with this lesson from where we left off, we were working with this version of the prototype tutorial in Unity. We can drive this car down the road and smash into some barrels, or crates rather. Music playing, and also some ambience for this mountain area. In this next lesson, we'll resume with the sounds that we created, but add some elements that allow us to randomize these sounds. And one of the main reasons for that is because when you randomize sounds, you're able to better replicate what happens with sounds in our physical world. You know, you drop a dish on the floor, or you open a door, or, interact with any object in our world. We never do it the exact same way every single time, and the event sounds different each time we do it. Do we drop a glass? Do we drop a plate? Are we opening a sliding glass door? Are we opening a wooden door? Are we opening a metal door? They're all going to sound different, not only because of the material, but also because how hard we push the door, how quickly we do it. Lots of different variations like that that will give each event a different sound. And in FMOD, we can use randomization to help get us closer to that same kind of effect. So that said, let's jump right back in with FMOD. This event, crate hit, is what we worked with last time. So when the truck in the Unity game hits the crate, we hear that, which is all good and well. But again, it'd be great to have some randomization and something so that event is varied and it doesn't sound like the exact same crate hit in the exact same way every time we do it. The first step is to add another audio track to this existing event. And I'm doing that mainly because I want to add another sound. I'm just going to simply grab this sound from my computer and drag it and drop it right in here. And when I do that, it automatically shows up here in the audio bin, hollow wood. That's the sound I just grabbed. So this is an alternative to just importing the sounds into the audio bin and then dragging it into the event or creating the event from there. This hollow wood sound is, well, exactly that. Just a really deep, resonant sound. But I wanted to add that to the sound effect because I felt like it was missing something that kind of conveyed the size and what I imagine would be resonance of that wooden crate itself. So with these two together, I now have more of a heavy thud with this hollow wood sound. But then we also have the original sound up here, which has some impact and also a little bit of metal and wood rattling from its original source. I don't think there's much that I really want to do to vary the hollow wood sound at all. It just needs to thud in the way that it does. But this crate sound is one where we can make some changes. And so we can focus on that. Let me mute this hollow wood sound for just a second. And let's talk about what we can do here. This instrument that's right here will play the sound, but you'll notice there's this trigger behavior section over here. Open that up, and you can see there's all sorts of different things in the trigger behaviors for this instrument. A lot of this stuff is probably going to be more helpful when it comes to working with music. But we can also do some things here with the sound effect. Although what I was expecting to see actually isn't there right now, but it is over here, so let's just go with that. I wanted to change the pitch. And if I click and drag this up, you'll see that it's just going to shift it higher. If I drag it up, drag it down, and it drags it lower. But what's really interesting is if you start by holding down the Option key, or probably in Windows the Alt key, click and drag, you'll see that that little green interface slider extends in both directions. And what that means is that you can actually vary the pitch so that it will change within that range, up or down, to a random amount. And this is what I was looking for earlier. Now that I've made that change over here in my trigger behavior, we get another little automation thing that opens up. And there we can actually see how many steps. Refers to this as steps, but I'm pretty sure it's half steps or semitones. So right now, I've got a range of 10.3. That may be broader than what I want. Let's go down to about half that. Okay, so there we could hear a change overall. This is happening randomly, so I just have to play it a bunch of times. We've got a pretty good range there. I can hear some that are definitely higher, some that are definitely lower. This could be a matter of taste, also a function of the individual sound effect that you put into your event, so don't let the numbers that I have on my screen influence you. As always, let your ears be your guide. But this is really helpful in that every time this impact happens now, the pitch won't be exactly the same. And that's a great step towards allowing this to sound more like a sound in our physical world. The other thing that we can do to this instrument is to change this other parameter down here called start offset. And that's going to do exactly what you would expect. It creates a point at which this instrument will start its playback. So right now I have it set to 33%. And if you listen carefully, you can hear it's not playing that entire sound. You don't notice it, visually at least, you don't notice it up here in the instrument, but look at what happens down here. You'll see the playback needle for this sound file start from about 33% through the sound file. Well, and given the fact that this has such a long decay, 33% actually looks more like halfway through this overall waveform. So we back that up a bit. And now it's starting later. But it's starting consistently later. And again, this is the sort of thing where it would be good to get some variation there. So we can do the same thing here and add a range for the start offset. So again, hold down the Alt key or Option key, click and drag up, and this gives us a range. And again, with this window open here in our trigger behavior and then automation and modulation, I can see the start offset, at least mine, is set to about 47%. And that's probably too broad because now sometimes we're getting just that little rattle at the end. So let's adjust it like this. I'll make it a little bit shorter. Okay, I think that'll work for now. Depending on your sound, again, you may have a certain amount of adjustment that you need to do, but it's a matter of just kind of pushing and pulling in different directions until you find the right balance between the start offset itself, the range that you've defined, and you kind of track that by looking at the numbers. For me, I have 17% here, and I have 38% over here. But I'm listening to it as I play it back. I'm watching to see where the playback needle is in this range. And I just want to see that I get a good mixture. And I really don't want to have so many isolated things with just that little click at the end. I'd like a little bit more of this sound. Yeah, I think that works well. So you can tweak that until your heart's content. Make sure you unmute the second track. And now that I hear both of these together, I realize my thud is a little too high, so I'm going to bring that down. Yeah, 3 dB, maybe just a tiny bit more. Yeah, I'm happy with that balance. And once the event is done, the process of getting this into the game is really pretty simple. Save the event like we'd always do, and then we don't need to worry about assigning this to a bank because the new sound file and changes that we made were made to this original event, which is already assigned to the master bank. So that's all set and ready to go. Just need to build this so that these changes get written out into the files that Unity is going to grab from FMOD. Switch back to Unity. Cache is updated, so it's changed that event. We can preview it here. And I can hear those changes already with the lower hit and with the randomization in the metallic component of this. In order to hear this, I think I'm also going to turn the music off for now because I want to be able to hear these crate impacts more clearly. So I just selected the empty object that the music was attached to and deselected the studio emitter that's playing that music. Our environment will still play, but we won't have the music. Whoops, and I completely missed that last crate. There we go. Obstructed by all the debris on the road. Well, I hear some randomization, yeah, and that's sounding great as far as I'm concerned. More tweaking, of course, to fine-tune it, but that's easy to do within FMOD, easy to do with the live update feature, and you can continue to tweak the parameters in FMOD, drive the truck around, smash into crates until everything gets to sound exactly the way that you want it to. Well, some other things that we can do here really require us to put more objects into this game. Right now we can really only crash into the crates, but it would be fun to be able to smash into some other things and hear what all the possibilities would be when we do that. So I'll switch back to project. I need a little bit more space, I think. Yeah, I just need to see where this is. I'm going to open up the source files. Oh wait, not source files. Materials. No, it's not in materials. Obstacles. There we go. That's what I want. So there's these barriers. This looks like one that you'd see in the middle of a street. This looks like a guardrail, which is kind of perfect for this road that's floating in the middle of nowhere. Guardrails could actually be safe to keep our car on this floating road. So let's put one of these things in there. I'm going to grab, this is prop barrier number 2, drag it and just drop it there in the hierarchy. Drops it right there in the middle of my truck. So let's pull that out and we can see it a little bit better. And spin it around, and yeah, this is just, looks like a wooden barricade. It's probably made of wood and metal. Pretty good size, pretty thick construction, but crashing into this could provide all sorts of interesting sounds. So let's switch over to FMOD and create an event for this thing. This is one that we'll actually need to build up from scratch. So I'll right-click over here, create a new 2D timeline. And since we have crate hit already, I'm going to call this one barrier-hit, kind of keep the same naming convention, but name it based on the thing that we're hitting. And so that we don't forget to do this later, let's go ahead and assign this to the master bank. No sounds in it yet, but we'll take care of that soon. And we need some audio. And again, just in the spirit of expediency, I'm just going to grab some sounds from my computer and drag them in here. Hit the open and close brackets is a really nice way to zoom into sounds in the timeline of an event quickly. And there we have a good impact sound. I like this one because it has the sense of a plank of wood, but there's also something in there that's a little bit metallic. I thought this was a really good sound to capture this this barrier based on its construction, or at least what we think it is from judging from the graphic in Unity. This sound isn't really enough though. The barrier itself, if we smashed into it with the truck, would hear more than just this impact sound, as good as that is. So we'll add another audio track. And in this, let's dig into an instrument in FMOD that really allows us to do a lot with randomization. Right-click in this blank area and choose this second option, Add Multi-Instrument. Multi-Instrument is a really interesting object instrument inside FMOD because it allows you to drop several different sound files or instruments into it, and then it will take care of doing a lot of the randomization for you, but not just with the parameters like pitch and start offset. It will randomize which of the sound files or instruments that it contains will be played when the event is queued. So with that in mind, I'm going to grab two wooden debris sounds on my computer and drag them, and I can drop them right into the instrument here, or I could drop them here. You see the section is called Playlist, and that's really how this multi-instrument functions. It contains a playlist with as many sounds as you need to put in it, and that playlist can be set to randomize in a couple different ways. Shuffle will randomize it in a way that it doesn't repeat. Randomize will actually allow those sounds to repeat, so you could get the same sound back to back. And then there's also different sequences that can be set to local scope within this event or global scope that's looking at bigger sequence within other FMOD objects that might be playing. With only two sounds like this, those options don't matter a whole lot right now because it's just going to alternate between the two. But with more sounds, one setting may be better than another depending upon what you're trying to do. To give you an idea what this sounds like, let me mute this impact. And you can hear there's different debris sounds. Now it sounds to me like this is getting cut off. And there's a couple of different ways to deal with this. One is to click this Asynchronous button. And let's start this from the beginning. And asynchronous, probably more apropos for music when we start talking about it later, but it basically means that it will continue to play this regardless of whether or not the playback needle is touching it. If I take asynchronous off, it gets cut off. And we can see that by grabbing this and dragging it out. And you can see there's actually a whole lot more sound here. And one of these files is longer than the other. I think doing something kind of like this, and then we could put our cursor right there at the edge and give this a bit of a fade just to make sure that that end is nice and smooth with no weird artifacts or anything that might pop at the end. But this way we can see the whole event play out. And it's not necessary to do this. That's part of the reason why asynchronous can be so helpful. But I think visually, for what we're going to do, it's kind of nice to be able to see the entire waveform. And now that that's there, and we're randomizing between these two different wooden debris sounds, I also want to think a little bit about the sequencing of this. You know, I imagine that if I was driving a truck and it hit something like this, I'd hear the impact, but then the debris falling off of it would take a little time before I actually heard that, or it had a chance to, hit the ground and roll off. So with that in mind, I'm going to slide this to the right. Oh wait, and we need to hear these together so we can hear the sequence where we get the initial impact, a little bit of time passes, and then we get the debris. And again, this is really a matter of personal taste and a function of the sounds that you've selected for this event. But I think the sequence or the timing difference between when we hear this and when we hear this is going to work well for what I want to do here. So let's keep that. This is all ready to go. And we've got lots of good things in here. So at this point, We can continue to tweak this and make some changes. If we want to do something with the pitch of this impact sound, we can, hold down the Option or Alt key, make a little shift right there. I don't think start offset is going to help all that much. But that gives us a little variation with this impact. And then for this multi-instrument, I think we can do more of the same. A little bit of pitch change, and then I think also some start offset will allow this debris to be heard at different points. And I'm going to open this up so I can see better what I've got here with automation and modulation. 38%, about 3 for pitch. Let's make that a little bit. Let's just go ahead and go all the way up to 6 semitones and see. Let's hear what that's like. 38% might be a little bit too much here. I'll bring that down. Bring this down a bit. And now it doesn't seem like enough. As I mentioned before, you can really go down the rabbit hole tweaking these parameters, which on one hand is great because we have that flexibility, but on the other, an iterative approach may be best, where you get something that sounds great and then test it in the game, hear what it sounds like, loop back to FMOD, fix it, and go back and forth. Trying to make it what you think is perfect here in FMOD before you've heard it in context of the game could be counterproductive. So in the interest of not laboring over this too much, I'm going to save it, file, build, repeat the process just like we did before, and then we switch back to Unity and FMOD Events tab, and there we go. We've got our barrier hit event. All that stuff just updates in the background after we've built the FMOD project. So it's great to have that sound. We've got our barrier here. We need to do a couple things to put this into the game. I think first and foremost, let's just go ahead and position this barrier in the world. So select this, go to its transform, and we can just do this the quick way. I've got some numbers that you can quickly plug in. Set the position, at least the X position, to 9.5. And let's zoom out a bit. Oh, sorry, I meant negative 9.5. There we go. I'm going to move it over to the left. And we'll set the Z to 20. That moves it down the road a bit. And then to make it go along the side of the road, we can set the rotation. This is going to be a Y rotation to negative 90, and that will put it there along the side of the road. So now we've got this barrier. It's close to the first crate, but on the edge. And that's a good position where we can easily drive over there and hit it when we start the game. We also need to add some elements to this so that we can attach our FMOD emitter and give this a sound. This is going to happen when the truck crashes into the barrier, and so we need to add some components in order to make this work. The first thing we want is a box collider. So you can add a box collider with the Add Component button. Choose Box Collider, and then we have some things that we can configure here. We do want this to be a trigger, and it's good to take a look at what's happening with the collider itself. So if you click this Edit Collider button, you'll see we get this little green square in here. And if I highlight that, hover over the scene window, hit the F key, I can zoom in and see this. And I'm going to grab this box collider and just resize it a bit so that it better matches the dimensions of this thing. And I have to tell you, doing this sort of stuff in 3D is not my strong suit. Although I actually managed to match the size of this pretty well today. I feel like I don't always get quite this lucky, but I'm happy with this. And basically the idea is to just make sure that this green box collider matches, or as closely as you can get it to, matches the dimensions of this barrier. So when we hit it, we'll make sure that it hits the box collider. I can turn that editing off, don't need to do that anymore. But I do need to add a component. Oh, and make sure, if I went over it too quickly earlier, make sure that this option for isTrigger is checked, because that's what we need in order to cue the FMOD component that we're about to add. That can be accessed through add component. Start to type in the search, and we'll find that we have an event emitter. Oops, just one click should do it. And this event emitter will play sound. What event do we want? This is going to be on a trigger enter. We don't need to worry about a stop event, but we do need to know what object is going to trigger the sound. That's going to be the player. And if you don't remember from the first tutorial, we say player there because our vehicle, the truck that we're driving, is tagged as the player. And so that lets Unity know that when the object tagged player or the truck hits this, it's going to play an event. And then we need to assign our event. Barrier hit is right over here. You can click on this and grab it, or you can also just drag and drop it from over here. Either way, you can get, well, come on, let me take it. There we go. Get that in there. I don't think there's anything we really need to worry about anymore. So that's in there, and we should be able to test this. Wow, I hit it so hard, I flew off the world. Excellent. Let's try that again, maybe not quite so aggressively. Yeah, and we've got... Yeah, you've got a good mixture of impact sounds, good mixture of debris falling. That is doing exactly the way that I wanted it to. And gives us a whole lot more variety than what we'd have if it was just a single sound playing the same way every single time we smashed into that barrier. Well, I noticed as I was doing that we have excuse me, a background environment that's playing, but it's not terribly interesting, little one-dimensional, and also, doesn't have that same characteristic that we would expect of sounds in our physical world, where, there's a lot going on. The world is a busy place, and those sounds are constantly going to be changing and varying. And there's a lot more that we can do with this environmental sound than just have, some sound file playing a loop and repeating the same thing over and over. So let's create that in FMOD. Back in FMOD, we can create a new mountain ambience event. We have this one from the first lesson. I think I want to leave this in place. So I'm going to create a new, and I can do this as a 2D timeline. And I'm going to call this one Mountain Scatterer. And the name Scatterer isn't going to make a lot of sense right now, but it will shortly, so bear with me, please. Let's see. Same thing as before. Make sure we assign this to the master bank. And then this one is also going to have a couple different elements. I'm going to start with a new sound loop. And I know I just said earlier, let's not work with loops. We're going to use a loop for part of this, but not for the entire thing. This is some wind that was generated with white noise and a lot of filtering. I grabbed an excerpt from a longer recording, made a seamless loop using that same technique that we talked about in the last lesson. And I liked using this because it doesn't have any birds, dogs, cars barking, any of the other things that were in the background of the last mountain ambience track that we created. And what that means is that I can start to add some of those things on my own and build up this background sound with all the different ingredients that I want, rather than being kind of stuck with what was in the location where another ambient loop that might be close to what I want. This is going to loop, so I will right-click on this and choose New Loop Region, and it will make sure that it snaps to the length of this single sound instrument here in FMOD. And so we know that this will, loop end to end. I edited it to do that, and FMOD ensures that that playback does what we need it to do. Now, we'll add another audio track and right-click on this audio track, and here the term scatterer comes full circle. I'll align that with the other one, and a scatterer is similar to the multi-instrument that we worked with earlier, but in addition to randomizing sounds that are in a playlist, it also has a lot more settings that will control how often those sounds play, and it will introduce some spatialization and take those sounds and position them in 3D space in the world and really give it that sense that those sounds are in this environment but at variable distances from where you are as a player listening to it. So let's fill this up with some sounds. I have a handful of bird sounds that I downloaded and edited, and I'm going to drop those here in the playlist. For the sake of the lesson, I'm ignoring the fact that hawks and eagles and cockadoos probably don't all live in the same biome. Hawks and eagles maybe, cockadoo I don't think. But it was one of those situations where maybe from a biological point of view it's not the right bird, but I really liked the sound of this bird. And so it's going to be in here in the mix with everything else. Whoops, wrong thing. Let's play this in FMOD. And you can hear all of our birds just going crazy. So let's take a listen, closer listen and look at this. First of all, the scatterer has this min and max spawn frequency. And this is, well, it's really pretty self-explanatory. How often do you want this to happen? By default, it's as few as 500 milliseconds and as often as 1 second. So it's happening pretty frequently. I don't think I would expect to hear birds all that often. So I'm going to set this higher, like around, 13, 14 seconds. And then I'm also going to increase the lower end of the threshold. And let's say, okay, this can happen as often as 1.5 seconds, but it may go as long as 14 seconds. So now when we play this event, the bird sounds are going to spawn, but at a range between 1.5 and 14 seconds. So we may have to wait for almost a quarter of a minute between individual bird sounds. And you'll notice that as this plays back, we have this playback needle that's tracking our progress across the timeline event. But when the scatterer spawns, you can see those little lines show up, and it's playing over that timeline at whatever rate that allows it to play at its original pitch. and it's kind of running on a separate timeline from everything that's here. So we have this same kind of asynchronous thing that we saw earlier. The other thing here that's really worth playing with is this min and max scatter distance. And this ribbon controller is really helpful because it allows us to work with a range of values. And I spent some time before the lesson working on this, so I'm just going to go ahead and set this. I settled on a value of 200 as my minimum and 5K for my maximum. And that, you'll hear the difference, put some of these birds at quite a distance away. Some may be so faint that we can't hear them all that, like that one. I couldn't hear that one very, very well at all. There was one, but distant. It's important to normalize these sounds to make sure that you give them a fighting chance to be heard. And if you find that the settings you use are just too aggressive and some sounds are completely inaudible, you may want to adjust your threshold. I'm going to bring this down to 5.0K, which is what I had before. And then obviously there's a whole lot of controls in here as well. There's pitch randomization, and I'm going to bring this up so that when these scatter sounds play, they will spawn, but the pitch will be a little bit different. That gives me some variation there. And it's not exactly clear to me, based on reading the FMOD documentation, exactly how the signal chain works, but we have pitch randomization here, of course, and I noticed when I was developing this that adding a little bit of randomization here as well as there really did seem to produce more variety overall. So that I found was helpful. And again, it's another one of those things where you can just let your ears be your guide and go with ranges and values that sound best given what you need for the sounds that you've selected. As I play this back, the wind is feeling pretty heavy and more blustery than what I wanted. I imagine not being able to feel a lot of wind where we are, but you can hear the wind sort of whistling in the distance. So we can tame that with some equalization. If we click on this section where we can add an effect, I can grab FMOD's 3-band EQ. I'm going to use the more gradual slope. I'm going to set my low at around 300, set my high at 1.3K, and then I'm going to back a high frequency down a fair amount, and I'm going to give the lows a little extra boost just to help push that wind kind of farther in the distance with something akin to a low-pass filter. I'm also going to back the volume down and really help that wind just kind of recede into the distance. Feels less oppressive now. You know, it's definitely still part of the scene, but in a way that doesn't feel quite as chilly. And then the other thing I really want to do to fine-tune this is to give this scatterer some reverb. Right now we don't really have any natural reverberation that's working, and I'd like it to have that for sure. So I'm going to click here and add, there we go, FMOD Reverb. There's a convolution reverb in here that might arguably be a better way to go, but I don't have any impulse response files with me right now, so I'm just going to go with this one. And then here, set the reverb to taste. I came up with a few settings earlier that I'm just going to default to for the sake of convenience. Really want that high frequency decay to be a little higher than it is by default. So I really want this to sound distant. I'm going to set the high cut at 1.3 kilohertz. And I'm really going to crank up the wet level. And then there we go, and then hope that these things spawn so I can actually hear them. And I suppose if this were the case, we can just readjust our spawn distance and our spawn interval, set these things to spawn more quickly, which isn't going to sound great, but allows us to hear our reverb more frequently, and that can make development of this go a little bit faster. All right, I'm okay with that for now. Maybe not perfect, but good enough for the sake of example. All right, I want this to be 1.5 seconds. There we go. 1.5 seconds, what did I say? Like 13, 14 seconds. Let's go ahead and make it a little longer at 15. And for now, I'm happy with this event. So I can stop it, save an FMOD file, build, as we always do, and then rotate back to Unity. FMOD has already helped Unity update, so we've got our mountain-scatterer event. And I think it makes sense to just replace that with the mountain ambience from the earlier lesson. So I can just simply use this menu and replace mountain-ambience with mountain-scatterer, or whatever name you gave it. And now this is attached to our environment as it was before, and we can hear it playing. And we can hear those birds spawning. They're really quiet. And you know what? Just for the sake of example, I'm going to put this back the way it was, but I'm going to turn it off. And just because I feel like I owe it to you to be thorough, let's just go ahead and build this from the ground up. So open up our project. I feel like I can't see everything that I want to in the hierarchy right now. Vehicle, obstacle, prop barrier. Road. There we go. It was inside environment. That's what I wanted. So let's just say, for the sake of example, that we wanted to attach this from scratch. Just to go through the process again. Environment makes sense. I'll go ahead and attach this to road just because it gives us another option. I click Add Component, FMOD Studio Event Emitter, and then I can choose that mountain scatterer event. We'll have it play when the object starts. We don't need it to stop because it will run for as long as the game runs. And there we go. And it sounds the same as it did before. But, you know, depending upon how you think of the organization of objects in your game, attaching the sounds to certain game objects may make more sense than others. And I think it's important to note that just for your own sense of stability and clarity as you're adding these sounds. So if you wanted to attach it from scratch to something new, using an existing game object like this really makes sense. And I thought the road worked well because this contains all of the individual pieces that build up the road. So it's kind of the, I don't know, the main focus of this world, at least as far as where we can and can't go. And that works well as sort of as a beacon to play this sound throughout the entire game world. And one other thing I should have mentioned earlier, switch back to FMOD for just a second. When we created this event, it's important to note that it was a 2D event. So it initially looked like this mountain ambience that we had, and it only had stereo outputs. But it's important to note that as soon as I added the scatterer sound, we got the multi-channel output. And that's something that you should understand about the scatterer instrument, is that because it will spawn sounds and we have the ability to configure the distance of, how far away from the player do we want this sound to be, it will automatically turn that event into a multi-channel output and give it spatial qualities. Now, it doesn't give it any sort of spatializer on the master track like you might find for other 3D sounds, because all of that work is being done here by the scatterer itself. But spatialization will be applied to the sound given the parameters that you've configured, and that output will be reflected here. And you can see when you play the event back, we have our wind as a stereo file is running in our stereo channels, but then we have our spatialized channels here, and you can see the levels responding in different ways depending upon where the scatterer chooses to spawn that sound in space in the game world.